Okay, you are live.
Good afternoon. Welcome to the September 24th meeting of the East Lansing Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. Heather, if you could take the roll call, please.
Dewan,
Present.
James Crum,
Present.
Michael Kruger. Lahanas,
Here.
Mayor Stevens,
Here.
Ballline,
Here.
Clark, Hackney,
Present.
Levinson,
Here.
and Smith.
Here.
Thank you. We have the agenda as presented by staff. Are there any changes to our agenda?
No change.
Seeing none, offer a motion to approve the agenda as presented and ask for a second. It's been supported by Luke Hackney. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The agenda has been approved unanimously. We have the minutes from our what meeting was this? This was September 10th meeting of the Brownfield Authority. Are there any changes to the minutes? Seeing none, I'll offer a motion to approve the minutes as presented and ask for a second.
Second.
Been seconded by Mayor Stevens. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the minutes are approved unanimously. We also have our item to allow for public comment extended to 5 minutes. As we have done with all Brownfield Authority meetings, I'll offer a motion to approve that and ask for a second.
Support.
Been supported by Luke Hackney. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. The adoption of the time limit for public comment has been adopted. Are there any written communications? I don't believe so. At this time, I will open it up for public comment from the audience if anyone wishes to address the Brownfield Authority. Heather? You're muted, Heather.
Sorry, we have 5 attendees on the line. Caller ending of the last 3 digits 004. You'll be unmuted and allowed to talk. Caller 004, you are unmuted and able to talk. If you would not like to talk, you can just say pass. All right. Caller ending 963, you'll be unmuted and give them 5 minutes to speak. If you don't wish to speak, you can say pass.
Hi, this is Alice Dreger. Sorry, I only just noticed the bonding resolution on the agenda. It was not there a couple days ago when I had looked at this agenda. This is extremely alarming that the DDA doesn't, the BRA doesn't have enough money to pay the interest payment. This bond and the TIF were written in a way to ensure that the DDA would not default. It was written very specifically with a schedule that allowed there to be enough money to meet the payments. And it doesn't make any sense to me that there isn't enough money because the taxes have in fact come in higher than we expected. So the only thing I can imagine is that perhaps the delays on the project caused the taxes to be delayed. But I'm struggling to understand how it could be possible that the DRA is missing about $2.4 million that it's supposed to have had to make a payment. The trust indenture, the signed one that was released to me under Freedom of Information Act, is missing information in the schedules of payments. So I guess that was done without the schedule, but the material I looked at I looked at this point carefully to make sure that there would be money, because this was a criticism people were raising about the potential of the bond and the potential for default. And it appeared at the time, and I recall checking with Mr. Danfield through Ruth Byers, there was no potential for default financially because there was going to be enough money. The bond was in part going to be self-funding. So in other words, there was supposed to be money set aside within the bond to pay the interest payments as necessary. And there was also supposed to be interest income saved to pay the bond. And I understand staff accidentally paid out $335,000 of that, but that doesn't explain why we're $2.4 million short. So this is very serious, and the BRA needs to find out what happened here, that the BRA is now in this position. I can't conceive of how this could have occurred. We did go into the last version apparently without a financial advisor. Mr. Leffler was at the meeting where the materials occurred, and it's possible that people thought he was working for the BRA side and not for the developers. We found out later from the payments that he was in fact working for the developers. But even so, it seems very strange that there's not enough money here to pay the first payment. So I hope there's some explanation. The other thing I would remind you of is that Mr. Meadows has repeatedly said and sent communications to members of the BRA indicating the council authorizing resolution that limits the use of the TIF to about $50 million. I know Mr. Danfield sees differently, but Mr. Meadows and I have talked, and we both feel strongly that it is the obligation of the BRA to, in fact, defend the taxpayers and defend the claim that the council, in fact, passed a council authorizing resolution for the TIF, limiting it to $50 million. Those are our elected representatives, and they did it very specifically as a cost control measure. You can put more costs into the bond, but you can't pay them from the TIF. And this is one of the communications Mr. Meadows sent to members of the BRA, very specifically outlining this and walking through very carefully. So there's just a lot of really troubling things happening here, and I am rarely this alarmed. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next caller, Michael Humier. You are going to be unmuted and allowed to talk. You have 5 minutes.
I have no comments.
Okay.
Thank you.
Next caller, Nate Watson.
Good afternoon. My name is Nate Watson with PFM. I'm here for a later agenda item.
Thank you. Next caller, Rajma Sambara.
No comments from me.
Okay. Final caller is Ronald Liscombe.
Hi, good afternoon. I have no public comments at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that is it.
Great. There are no written, or excuse me, any communications from staff?
No, sir.
Okay. Let's move on to our business agenda item 5.1. Adam?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We just discussed this at the DDA meeting about an hour ago. Same motion for consideration. Motion to approve the agreement with Foster, Swift, Collins, and Smith for legal services and direct staff to negotiate an agreement with Miller Canfield for supplemental legal services as outlined in their response to the RFQP, with the modification of their fee for services to $295 per hour, and authorize the chairperson to execute the agreements as reviewed by council.
I'll offer that motion and ask for a second.
Support.
It's been seconded by Luke Hackney. Any further discussion? Hearing none, can you take a roll call vote on this, Heather?
Yes. Dewan,
Yes?
Broom,
Yes.
Lahanas,
Yes.
Kruger,
Yes.
Ballline,
Yes.
Clark,
Yes.
Hackney,
Yes.
Levinson,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Mayor Stevens,
Yes.
Passes 10-0.
Thank you. Let's move on to item 6.1, consideration of a resolution authorizing the issuance and delivery of limited obligation tax increment revenue refunding bonds and providing for related matters. Adam?
I'll take this one, Chair Dewan.
Is that, I'm sorry, Tom?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, okay. I just don't
Great.
see you on my screen. Thank you. Got you
Oh.
now.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Chair Dewan. Hello, everyone. As you'll recall, the bonds issued for Center City were essentially construction financing. And as such, they were structured in such a way that there would be no payments due until after the end of the project, and the interest on the bond amount, which was fully funded, as you'll recall, to provide assurances that there'd be money to pay for the construction of the public infrastructure and municipal garage in the event that the project did not come to fruition. So those monies have been accruing interest, and I think the expectation and certainly the intention was to refund prior to when those payments would come due. So that's essentially what we're in front of the board today to discuss. As the BRA will recall, in July, you rescinded a previous bond authorization and directed staff to obtain the services of a municipal advisor in regards to the refunding of the construction financing for the public infrastructure and municipal garage for the Center City District. On September 10th, the Brownfield Authority approved an agreement with PFM Financial to act as our municipal advisor. Staff has been working with them since to get them all the information they need, and they have been working diligently to get up to speed. It is the recommendation of Bond Counsel and the municipal advisor that the board approve a bond authorizing resolution. This will
Tom, we've lost your audio, Tom.
Tom, we can't hear you.
Tom. Oop. Someone's got to text him or something.
Yeah, I will.
Chair, in the meantime, we should probably make a motion to recuse Greg Ballline from this.
Thank you, Michael. Let's make certain we get Tom back online, and we can proceed with that motion if there's a second.
I'll second. But yeah, wanting to make sure that our staff can get back on.
Sorry about that. Seem to have
Tom,
dropped off there.
Yeah, Tom, if you could just hold for a moment. We lost you during the middle of your presentation, but we do have a request of a board member to recuse Greg Ballline that's been moved by Michael Kruger and supported by Mayor Stevens. So we're going to address that first, okay? So the motion is to recuse Greg. All those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed? All right, thank you. And Tom, if you could proceed with your presentation.
Sure. I don't know where you lost me.
You're
So
probably about a minute and a half. You were probably going for about a minute. So you got to go back a little ways here about reauthorizing the bonds, and it was intended to take them out. We had refinanced and gotten to September where we hired PFM.
Okay.
I think that's where we kind of lost you.
Yep.
okay. So since then we've been working a lot, obviously, with PFM to get them the information they need, and they've been working very diligently to get up to speed. It is the recommendation of Bond Counsel and the municipal advisor that the board approve a bond authorizing resolution. This will allow us to, or allow our team to attempt to structure a deal that will be marketable while looking for savings for the BRA. There are more details in the memo that I provided, but some main points that I'd like to highlight are, first, again, the first payment due on the bonds includes the interest that has been accruing since the bonds were fully funded in 2017. And according to our financial advisor and legal counsel, it is in the best interest of the BRA to refund these bonds prior to December. Number two, for marketing purposes and due to the ideal time frame, it may be wise to include representatives of the developer on the team that's working to refund the bonds. The resolution in your packet does allow for this as an option, but it caps any cost of issuance for the developer's representation to $140,000. Number three, the authorization today sets the parameters within which a deal can be structured. It does not constitute a final action or mean that the refunding is certain. And lastly, this bond authorizing resolution authorizes the chair and vice chair as officers to approve a bond issuance to refund these bonds, but only within the parameters established and upon the advice and consent of bond counsel and the municipal advisor, who must protect our legal and best interests, legal and financial best interests for the BRA. So Chair Dewan, with your permission, I'd like to turn it over to Ron Liscombe, our bond counsel, to provide some additional context, and then with your permission to Mr. Watson from PFM Financial, our municipal advisors, to provide also some thoughts from his side, and then open it up to questions.
Thank you, Tom. Heather, could you allow Mr. Lipscomb to be included in the conversation?
Yes, Mr. Lipscomb, you are unmuted.
Hi, good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. I think included in your board package was a memo that we originally prepared for you a few months ago and presented for you, that kind of rehashed some of the history of the project and the city council's approval of the Brownfield plan and the development agreement. Specifically, when we talked about it in July, it was in the context of the 2017 bonds and what was contemplated to be paid from those bond proceeds. We represented to you the memo and added, actually for your benefit, actually excerpts of the development agreement, really for your benefit to see the approval of the council, the execution by the mayor at the time, and the specific language in terms of what the actual tax increment revenue capture that was approved by the council. I can go through a lot of the the language about what was contemplated to be paid out of the bond proceeds from the 2017 bonds, if you'd like. But perhaps if you scroll through to Exhibit A, which were the development agreement excerpts, I started just with the cover of the development agreement. You'll see in the upper right corner, it was approved by council on.
I'm sorry, Mr. Liscombe.
Yes.
Let's wait for staff to pull that up.
Yeah, certainly. Okay.
We have Exhibit A now available for
Absolutely.
the board's review.
Yeah, so just looking right in the upper right corner, it shows, it was approved by council on June 20th of 2017. That was the same meeting where the Brownfield plan was also approved. It was approved right after the Brownfield plan. So just scrolling to the next page of the exhibit, right here, you'll see the mayor, Mark Meadows, signed, city clerk signed, a couple other people signed. Scrolling down to the next page, this is the exhibit. You'll see column 1, column 2. What was specifically approved for the project was column 2, and I apologize. It was a large paper sheet that was that I copied onto this. But basically, if you'll scroll down slightly, column 2 is the specific part of the project that was approved. Scroll down to section C. This is really the section in the column 2. You'll see the Grand River activities were not approved, and then section D1, demolition of existing buildings. When you talk about the scope of the project that was approved, this is what the council approved, and this is, you know, in the references to the development agreement, referencing exhibit N in column 2 of what was approved to be paid from the tax increment revenue. This is my read of what was approved. This is the significance, is that it was really defining the scope of the project. So I put this here so it would be, you know, easy for you to see. You can see column 1 and column 2 are identical in all other respects, other than, you know, that that scope of project, so to speak. And then if you just continue to scroll down to the next page. So this is the section of the development agreement that deals with the bonds, and I apologize, I just kind of captured these as pictures there. So there's, you know, these are the page numbers that corresponded in the development agreement. There are several pages here, but it's section 1.8 of the development agreement that really address the bonds and, you know, what would be paid out of the bond proceeds. And, you know, it also talks about the tax increment revenue capture. So if you'll scroll down, for purposes of today's discussion, you can scroll down, there's a section highlighted. I think it's on the next page, or maybe the page following. You can stop right there. The relevant language of what I wanted to point to your attention are the sections right here. The language says, notwithstanding any provision to the contrary in this agreement or in Brownfield Plan number 24, the maximum amount of tax increment revenue that may be captured is $55,952,038. And then in the next paragraph, it references that same amount. I think that's very important because it seems as though there's been a lot of noise about what the council approved. This is very plain language. It means the same thing today as it meant in 2017. And it means exactly what it says. $55,952,038, not $50 million, not any lesser amount. I mean, it is what it is. You know, it can't really be any more clear. So I'll stop there and I guess ask if there are any questions regarding at least, you know, this memo or, you know, the provisions of the development agreement related to the capture of the tax increment revenue.
Hi, Ron. Thank you. Jim Kroom.
Yes.
Maybe you could speak to the argument that maybe the mayor and a caller put forth that that even with this language, although the tax revenue could be captured, it can't be paid out of the Brownfield plan. There's some theory that they have.
I'm sorry. My internet connection broke a little bit. Could you just restate that, please?
Yeah, just a caller had identified an issue, and I think the mayor does in a memo too, sort of indicating that while while it can be captured, that it can't be used to pay the bonds.
Okay. So if you want to go back to the development agreement, and you can go back to, I guess we can walk through kind of step by step. Go back to Exhibit N. Scroll, if you will, down to right below section D, the first sign, the first, okay, stop right there. You'll see sections, the line where it says sections A, B, and D, total TIF eligible expense, that first line right there. That project costs $24,389,518. Okay. That's the project cost that they approved. Okay. This is Exhibit N, column 2. That is the project that they approved. Now, if you would like to scroll down into the development agreement to page where it says right there. Okay, you can go right back there. Okay, right there. Right in the middle, right next to where the trustee is in parentheses. We'll start the sentence right after that. It says the bond proceeds will be used to pay for the costs of the eligible activities, which are set forth in column 2, scenario A of Exhibit N. The net proceeds of the BRA bonds shall not exceed $24,389,518. That is that project cost that we just saw. For purposes of this agreement, net proceeds shall be equal to the par amount plus original issue premium, less original issue discount, less cost of issuance, less proceeds allocated to Cap I, and less any proceeds deposited into a debt service reserve fund, which is capped at 1.25 times max annual debt service. So that language right there, I mean, clearly is, you know, an indication that that position is incorrect. Let me see, it seems like there was one other section that would be contrary to that position, but I really don't need to go on. I mean, there's nothing in this document that supports that argument.
So what you're saying is that this language, what the mayor and council intended was to cover the net proceeds, in other words, what the development project would look like, and that the gross proceeds on top of that are costs of issuance and so on?
Yes, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly what it says.
So in their limitation, they were saying, look, we don't want you to go above amount X because we don't want this money spent on anything other than environmental and infrastructure and the parking structure on and on. But that doesn't limit that resolution did not limit the costs. Those are handled elsewhere. Okay.
That's correct. That's correct. I mean, and in fact, it would beg the question, if they only expected the bond proceeds to pay, well, if they only expected both the tax increment revenues to pay for the project costs of 24 million and interest on that, it begs the question how everything else would be paid, including, you know, the cost of issuance and a debt service reserve fund. It just is nonsensical to take that position because, I mean, there are, you know, I just don't understand, you know, just from a practical, you know, perspective how anything would get paid if tax increment revenues were only intended to pay the project costs and interest on the project costs. It just is not, it's just not rational. If the bonds had to be issued, they had to be paid for. And if there was a debt service reserve, it had to be paid for. If that was not paid for out of bond proceeds, as it often is, then it had to be paid for out of tax increment revenues as they accumulate. And according to that position, the bond proceeds could only be used to pay for, notwithstanding any of the language here, the bond proceeds could only be used to pay for the $24,389,518 and then interest on that. I mean, there's just absolutely no support in this document other than that single sentence for that position. And in order to support that position, you have to literally reject the other 100 pages of the document.
And then you've also pointed to the notwithstanding anything else in this document language,
Yes.
which would trump
Everything.
everything. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Lipscomb, do you have additional comments to share, or are there other questions from board members for our bond counsel? I believe Tom Fehrenbach was going to invite our financial municipal advisor to also provide comments. Is that Mr. Watkins that Heather, will you add into the conversation?
Good afternoon. This is Nate Watson with PFM. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Perfect. Okay. So again, my name is Nate Watson. I work with PFM Financial Advisors. We're here to serve the authority as its financial advisor. Again, we're solely tasked with looking out for the best interest of the authority as we walk through a possible refunding. Over the last 2 weeks, I've had time to talk to staff, bond counsel, go through series 2017 documents, also put together kind of preliminary cash flows to try to ingrain myself as quickly as possible in this project. And the reason that we are recommending the authorizing resolution being adopted today is kind of threefolded at this juncture in time. One, interest rates are low, just we're at historic low interest rates. It is generally a good time to refund bonds. Two, the taxable value of the BRA 24 has now been established. Therefore, the taxable value will play into the captured revenues. So now there's more certainty on what that captured value is going to look like, at least in the near term. So we have that benefit moving from 17 into 2020. It hopes to better structure what the debt service payments would look like as compared to what the captured value, revenues look like. And also third, there is a large interest payment upcoming on that Series 17 deal on 12/1/2020. So again, the third reason is order to refund the existing 17 bonds. And then because the captured revenue is roughly $1.3 million, then deferring part of that 12/1/2020 interest payment, throughout the life of the captured. So those are the threefold items that make adopting the resolution, at least in our eyes, makes sense. Let's see here.
Peter, this is Jeff. Just a quick question on that point.
Go ahead, Jeff.
In your mind, do you, I appreciate the 3 points there on number one on timing. Considering we're at 9/24 and we have till 12/1, do we have enough time for refinancing this in the market?
It's tight, but I think it's doable. If we take action quickly, I think there is enough time to complete the refunding prior to that 12/1/2020 interest payment.
What happens if there's not enough time?
Well, Ron, do you want me to try to articulate financially, or do you want to talk about it from a kind of bond counsel's?
Yeah, sure. So, and I think my colleague Bill Danhoff is on, and he's I think the last four of his cell is 2004. I can start, of course. So the way we have the indenture set up, and the way the development agreement was set up is that there was a guarantee on debt service from the developer for any shortfalls in debt service. So in the event that there is a shortfall in the December 1 payment, obviously that's what we would initially want to look to. As a practical matter, that is less than ideal. You at some point you want to sell these bonds, so you want to avoid that.
Exactly. From my financial standpoint, any sort of default on the original obligation would certainly make any sort of refunding effort a lot more difficult. So, we're in an environment where savings could most likely be achieved from refunding that 17, not only, avoiding any sort of default on the 12/1 interest payment date, but also, taking the low interest rates in today's environment and really saving money for the authority over the long run. And if there is any sort of default or any sort of forbearance or agreement to the original 17 deal, then of course it just makes marketing the refunding a more difficult proposition.
So are we, this is Jim Krim, so are we saying that if there were to be a default, that the developer is responsible for that shortfall in the ability to pay the accrued interest? So that sounds kind of interesting, but does that mean that the BRA/city would not be responsible for that on one hand, but on the other hand, you're saying you can never sell a defaulted bond? That's not a popular thing. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think it's fair. You don't want to get to that point. Contracts are contracts and promises are promises. And, you can enforce them, and if they don't, you can enforce them to the extent that they're enforceable. And so, but that being said, I would say that the ideal situation here is that, we would want to, move forward with issuing, refunding the security as soon as possible, and recognizing, I think in part that, how we got here is more a function of, just the accrued interest since the issuance of the 2017 bonds, not necessarily how interest would accrue on the refunding bonds, if that makes sense. You have this large interest payment, and certainly Nate can speak to this more, but if you'll remember, the initial 2017 bonds were anticipated to be drawdown bonds. And we then switched over to having them fully funded, really to ensure that the public improvements would be, it was a guarantee to ensure construction of the public improvements. And so the 2017 bonds were fully funded at issuance, as opposed to having some sort of drawdown structure. And so as a result of—
wait, hang on. So to answer the conspiracy sort of viewpoint, I don't mean to say it that way, but so it's just that in order to have the comfort and to make a sound decision to have this fully funded, so if there were any problem with the developer in terms of construction or financial ability, it could be completed with those funds.
Exactly.
So in return for that, in return for that, instead of the drawdown methodology, which would have engendered less interest accruing over this last 2-year period or 3-year period, we got the comfort of and safety of on behalf of East Lansing of knowing that this would be completed.
That's correct.
So it's like a self-funded construction bond.
That's correct.
Performance bond.
That's correct.
Okay, well, thank you.
Certainly.
Are there additional questions for either Mr. Lipscomb or Mr. Watson?
I have one more, Peter.
Go ahead, Jeff. Jeff.
So the way I'm reading this is we had a window of time over 2 months ago to get the bonds to marketplace. We resisted that based off of inconsistencies in the reported number, and pulling our own consultants in, we've delayed that timeline as well. We are now in a very significant crunch to get this done in order to avoid defaulting on the bond. So I don't think we're left with many choices here, unless I'm missing something.
That seems like a pretty good assessment to me. And plus our financial advisor and our attorney is recommending this at this point. So I think we move forward is what I think.
Are there other
Is that a motion?
questions?
I do have yeah, I agree. And I feel like the board members inflicted this on ourselves or on, yeah, I mean, but that's neither here nor there. I do have a question about so there was an $800,000 authorized eligible fund that Harbor Bay was trying to roll into the refinancing at one point. What happens with that money, or where is that money? Does Tom, can you speak a little bit? Do you know what I'm talking about? Yeah.
You're muted, Tom.
Sorry, I was muted. Yes, there was. So there were, on top of the $24,389,000 that was allocated as the project fund for eligible expenses, there was an additional overage on the project, which was funded with the interest on the bond fund appropriately. And that also was funded by developer equity. So that would be the $822,000 that you're referencing. Mm-hmm. And the BRA has the ability to either roll that into this refunding or leave it to the side outside of this refunding. And if that is the case, it will continue to accrue 5% interest. And if there is tax increment revenues available after the bonds are fully defeased, the developer would have the ability to recoup those costs at the end of this period until such time as the 30-year time horizon has expired. So we've asked PFM to provide an analysis for the BRA as to whether it makes sense financially to roll that in. Or whether it's better not to, and I think that they will accomplish that analysis as part of the next steps here.
I have a question. If we proceed with the recommendation of PFM and Miller Canfield, what will the reporting be back to the Brownfield Authority, and what's the timeline, and what can we anticipate, and what are the next steps? And either Mr. Watson and or Mr. Lipscomb, if you could just articulate that for us.
Sure. From a financial standpoint, the next steps would be assembling the entire working group financing team on the authority's behalf, putting together disclosure items in regards to the BRA, putting together projected cash flows in terms of the captured revenue as it relates to debt service, packaging that all up, and then start searching for a purchaser, an ultimate purchaser for the refunding bonds. Then what PFM would be tasked with is hopefully we have more than one offer, or we can, start engaging with investors as well, talking about, these are the security items they might need in order for these certain different interest rates. We will provide analysis to staff throughout the process. And then the way that the resolution is ultimately put together, my understanding, Ryan or Bill can speak to this, is that the delegation would be given to one of the authority members to ultimately sign the final refunding transaction, and a part of the ability for the designated person to sign that final obligation would be a written letter of recommendation from PFM outlining why we think that it is in the best interest of the authority to move forward with the refunding, assuming that is our recommendation.
Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, two questions that I hope Watson can speak to, so that the citizens and our board members can understand the business logic and what customarily happens and why it's in our best interest. What I don't want to have happen is to have questions after this as to why the developer folks are still involved and their advisors. So I need you to speak to that. And that was limited to 140, why that makes business sense, why it's appropriate, why it's in our best interest to do that, given your experience. And then also, if the proposal is to allow the chair and vice chair to execute documents going forward, why that's also either customary or appropriate. I just don't want the folks in the community to think there's something that's odd or strange or ill-advised.
Sure, that makes great sense. So I'll tackle the developer involvement first, since that was your first question. From our initial work and analysis in terms of where we're at today, the developers team has been ingrained on this project for many years. Specifically, Robert W. Baird is ingrained in the security being offered, and more importantly, really conversations with potential investors. Why is that important? Because our back is against the wall in order to complete a refunding between whatever today is, September 24th, and a few days before 12/1/2020. And those conversations with not only possibly purchasers or private placement agents should very much expedite this timeline. And
so wait a minute. So I don't know, our back's against the wall. We have an appropriate amount of time possibly to do this. And there could also be extensions granted or negotiated. But in a normal timeline, why would it also not make sense to have them involved in terms of potential bond purchasers, or I guess purchasers the term? Why in their due diligence wouldn't they want to speak to the underlying developer and the project owner and so on? And I mean, is that also a reason?
It is, and all those are reasons. And I didn't mean completely back against the wall, but that the 12/1 date is sneaking up on us, and that is the date that first interest payment is due. Again, bringing in the developer's financial advisor. Again, there's recommendations on packaging the security. This isn't a typical kind of Michigan underlying obligation that's sold very often. So thinking through the entire process of what is best in best interest of the authority, comes with kind of being able to bounce ideas off of other firms that are in the know. That kind of speaks to the delegation portion as well, because we don't exactly know what this transaction is going to look like. But also, the credit that's being purchased is the 4 parcels in the BRA 24. And in terms of putting together potential disclosure that will be presented to the purchaser, that is also very beneficial if you can talk to the developer. I know it's a completed project, but also being able to compile some of that disclosure, again, in a quick process and populate that into the hands of purchasers, that is a benefit that their team brings to this process.
Just real quick question.
Sure.
If possible, considering, we're kind of inextricably linked to the developer on this bond, if possible, can our consulting services take first position as we move into this, phase of the refunding, and have the developers consulting services take second position on that, just so we maintain the intent of the interest of the city in the approach?
Yes, it's our intent of PFM to be ingrained in the process the entire way through. Nothing that we don't agree with initially will be offered to investors. So we're able to vet what that security package looks like before it gets into a proposed investor's hands. So we don't kind of waste time with that. Nothing that we feel is not in the best interest of the authority will be entertained by a purchaser. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does.
So we'll be very, very involved throughout the process. We won't just be sitting back waiting to provide a thumbs up or thumbs down on whatever the ultimate package is. We will be there ingrained throughout the process.
Thank you. Additional questions of council? What's the pleasure of the board?
We just need to hear the logic for you and I being able to sign.
Sure.
Yeah, this is Ron. Nate, if you want to go ahead, that'd be fine. I can jump in. Sure.
You feel free to take the lead, or I
Yeah,
can if you want.
Yeah, so I think we talked about this a little bit a few months ago as well. I've been involved in couple hundred transactions over the last 7-8 years, and I actually have not been involved in one where we had to go back to an authorizing body for final approval of details. I say that to say that it is absolutely customary for final approval of the bonds to be delegated to authorized officers. And in fact, that's, amplified in this circumstance because of the condensed timeline that we're operating under. It's not unusual at all. In fact, it would be unusual for it to be the other way. I mean, it wouldn't be unheard of. It really depends. If you look at specific issuers, there's, certain practices where they may approve final bond details. But that certainly is the minority and not the rule. It's just very standard practice, and particularly in these negotiated type deals where we're moving fairly quickly, and certainly under this condensed timeline for this authority to be delegated.
So it's consistent with best practices, but those best practices exist. Why? It's because we will need to have speed to market if we reach an agreement that's beneficial in terms of our financial advisor's opinion, in the best interest of the city and the BRA. We would want to be able to pull the trigger on that quickly. And it's also the case, is it also the case that when we deviate from normal practices that could limit the potential purchaser market, and I don't know if it would increase the costs or the interest that we would pay, because it's outside the ordinary course. It doesn't feel like it would do that. But what are the underlying reasons?
There may be an element to that. I will say that, oftentimes in negotiated transactions, you'll have a rate that's set, subject to acceptance within a certain period of time. Oftentimes that's a day. And, sometimes, you can negotiate that out, but the longer period of time between the offer and the acceptance, I mean, I've never seen it longer than a day, between the time a rate is set and the time that they expect approval.
So it's
And-
like on a home mortgage, it's like a rate lock, except it's really short in commercial transactions. And we could be prejudiced if our experts are able to negotiate a very, well, just a beneficial rate, and we're not able to lock that in and execute on it, then all bets are off. And if the market changes, we're left hanging.
I think that that's a fair assessment. Absolutely. Yes. It's not unusual at all for the broad parameters to be approved, and the delegation authority to be made, particularly when you do have, the bond counsel and your municipal advisor on board, providing comfort to you, basically, that you are getting a market rate deal.
Thank you.
Could
Yeah, George?
Yes, I part of my comfort is with letting the board members sign now, where it was concerned before was we've locked in two specific issues. One is having our financial advisor assure us of the terms at that point to give us our impartial advice. And the second is that we've locked in the expenses of the developer, which was a concern of mine. So I'm perfectly comfortable at this point saying that situation has made me comfortable delegating it to the board chair and vice chair if that's who's going to be signing.
Are there other comments or questions?
This is Jeff.
Yes, Jeff.
My concern has always been the time value of money. We had this conversation, if I look back in my notes, started in June. We're now at the end of September. If we don't start moving forward here and getting after this, we're going to lose both on the bond rating and the potential of, the interest rates and also the concern on the 12/1 date. I don't feel like it's prudent for us to then ask for another meeting of the entire board for us to make a decision on this when we can authorize the officers who have been in every conversation since to get this done as quickly as possible. It wouldn't be prudent of our duty to the city to continue to ask the entire board to come together on that.
Thank you. Any additional comments? What is the pleasure of the board with regard to the resolution that's been presented to us?
I guess I'll move support of the resolution.
Should we read it into the
Approval
record?
of the resolution, or it should be read, yeah.
Yeah,
It's at the back of the, it's at the first page, second page of the item, but I can make the motion if you want. Move approval of the resolution authorizing the issuance and delivery of limited obligation tax increment revenue refunding bonds and establishing the BRA officers as authorized officers for purposes of approving final bond documents within the parameters set forth in said resolution upon satisfactory completion of all the required documents as approved by BRA municipal advisor and bond counsel.
it's been moved by George and supported by Jim. Is that
Support,
correct?
yes, support.
Okay. Any further discussion? Seeing none, can we have a roll call vote, please? Adam or Heather?
Yeah. Dewan,
Yes.
Croom,
Yes,
Lahanas,
Yes.
Kruger,
Yes.
Ballline, oh, I'm sorry, Clark,
Yes.
Hackney.
Luke, you might have been muted.
Luke said yes.
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 Levinson,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
Mayor Stevens.
Yes.
Passes 9-0.
Okay. Thank you for the participants and all the conversation. Any further items need to be addressed by the Brownfield? I don't believe so. I'll offer a motion to adjourn and ask for a second.
Second.
Been seconded. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye.